Thanks very much. I thought I was going to have to spend a lot of effort justifying a role for libraries in the area of data management, but I was set up by the last few questions. So if my presentation sounds staged around that, you'll have to forgive me. But as Pascal was saying, I'm the director of a project called Scholars Portal, which is a project of the Ontario Council of University Libraries. So the University of Waterloo Library is a member of the council, as are 20 other members across the province of Ontario. So we cover in total an FTE population currently of about 420,000 faculty and students. What is OCO all about? Pascal gave you a pretty good idea, but basically we look at, we focus our activities in a number of areas. So we're very interested in how we can reduce costs through collaborative purchasing, both of content, but also by building shared infrastructure where that makes sense. We aggregate our content onto local delivery systems to support enhanced discovery and enhanced linking. We have a mission to provide for long-term preservation of the digital resources we acquire. And another important area, we build research and learning support services in Scholars Portal that we hope will enhance the capacity of OCO member libraries to meet their institutional needs. So in Scholars Portal, our focus is not serving researchers and students directly, but rather serving the needs of the library so that they can accomplish the missions that they've set out for themselves within their own institutional frameworks. And often there's a lot of commonality in those missions, and that's really the kinds of things we focus on in Scholars Portal, is trying to identify where there's a common interest in particular areas, and then figuring out ways to build common infrastructure or common services to support those activities. So over the years, what I'll call the OCO Digital Library, essentially it's your own library as well as a member of OCO, has really grown significantly in terms of the types of services we offer, but also the complexity of the data that we're dealing with. So we started out in 2002 collecting electronic journals, and most of you won't remember, but in 2002, electronic journals had really only been in existence since about 1995. So it was a fairly new activity back then. In 2004, we started getting involved in providing linking services through SFX, which is a tool that's used here, I know, at Waterloo, as well as helping getting involved in the area of research skills support by licensing for all of the universities an implementation of RefWorks, which is a citation management system. In 2008, we got a further grant from the provincial government to build a repository of numeric social science data. This turned into our Odyssey service. In 2010, we released our first release of electronic book service. And just recently, just this year, we've created and released a new product called Scholars Geo Portal, which is a platform for delivering GIS data to researchers within the institutions. So over time, as you can see, we've moved increasingly from traditional, what you might have considered traditional library types of resources like journals and books, into more esoteric areas, into more primary research materials related to social science data, survey data, statistical data, as well as geospatial data, both raster and vector data. Just to give you a sense of where we are now, eJournals is our electronic journal repository, and we have over 26 million full-text documents in the system now, but with metadata that we've loaded from sources like JSTOR and Project Muse, the total citation count is just under about 32.8 million citations, all is searchable within a single platform. And we add now about 1 million new articles to the system every day. So this is a fairly unique repository, definitely within the North American library context. It's not many consortia that have undertaken this kind of aggregation activity. And it has set us up very well to also address digital preservation issues, which I'll talk about in a little while. The ebook repository, which is a more recent repository, consists of just under 500,000 titles now. We've got about 134,000 or over 134,000 electronic books that have been purchased from various scholarly publishers such as Oxford and Wiley and Springer. And we also have loaded 360,000 digitized volumes. Some of you may know that the Ontario libraries through OCO have been participating in an effort called the Open Content Alliance, which is an effort to work with the Internet Archive to digitize textual resources that are held in the various libraries across OCO, published before 1923, so out of copyright materials, and make those available for users in electronic form. So between the commercial content and the ongoing digitization work, we're at about 50,000 new titles each year to this platform. Odyssey, which I mentioned, is a repository. We have about 3,000 data sets on Odyssey right now, primarily from Stats Canada, Gallup, Leger, Ipsos, Reid. And we've also incorporated into the platform 12,000 additional data set descriptions from other Canadian and US social science research databases such as the ICPSR project. So some of the features of Odyssey, which if you get a chance to see later, I think you'll be impressed. With books and journals, primarily what the interaction the user has with the data is through the metadata to identify the resource of interest, perhaps browse it online, and then take the item away for use. With Odyssey, because the data sets can be quite large, and the data that you may be interested in, it may only be a small subset of that larger data set, Odyssey supports what we call subsetting tools. So the ability to go in and using the metadata, drill down to just those elements of the data that you want, just those particular questions or whatever, and be able to take the data out in multiple formats. So it moves a little beyond the traditional library delivery model to a more sophisticated model where we're providing basic visualization and analytical tools to researchers so that they can begin to work with the data online and then take it away into their research environments. That's true as well for the geospatial portal. And I seem to be, there we go. A little cut off here, but what the Scholars Geo Portal adds above and beyond Odyssey in terms of that previewing and visualization is, you can't see it too well on the right-hand side, but a full mapping interface that allows a user, once they've identified the data sets of interest, the GIS data sets of interest, to be able to plot those data onto a mapping environment and to be able to overlay them, change opacity information, to be able to search the data sets for particular features, limit display of those features, and so forth. So in the portal, which just started up recently, we've now got over 500 described GIS data sets from a variety of providers. Principal one is the Ontario Geospatial Data Exchange, which is an exchange set up within the provincial government for sharing vector and raster data generated by various provincial ministries. Stats Canada, we rely on them for boundary files, and we also pull in data from other sources, including a small amount of open access data. Currently, the whole system contains over 80 terabytes of vector and raster imagery, and that's going to grow considerably over the next few years as we continue to add resources to the system. So how have we put all of this together? Within OCO, one of the institutions, the University of Toronto, plays the role as a hosting agency for Scholars Portal. And that involves OCO contributing funds to the University of Toronto Library to establish a central data center, a central data facility at Robarts Library in Toronto. So currently we are using a very traditional approach to storage and hardware delivery for serving up these applications. So all of these applications we've talked about have certain characteristics in common. They're high use applications, high availability is required, meaning that they can't go down very often. Otherwise, that interferes with the research work of 400,000 students across the province. They're high availability, high reliability, also very high cost systems. So the infrastructure that we have in Scholars Portal right now is essentially a Cadillac infrastructure designed to meet the needs of that kind of high availability, high use sort of research application. As we look forward, as we're moving forward now and looking at new services, that are thinking about that infrastructure and the additional needs of our infrastructure are beginning to change. And that ties into some thoughts that I like to put out on the table today about how the needs of libraries for large-scale storage and different types of services are really positioning libraries, particularly in the OCO context, well to play an important role, I think, in the area of data management and data preservation. So some of the new services that, so the traditional services we talked about are, I would describe those as services where we collect content and make it available to our users. But some of the new services that that all the libraries are getting involved in and we're beginning to support within the Scholars Portal context include things like support for scholarly publishing activities. So we're currently, many of the OCO libraries use a product called OJS, the Open Journal System, to allow for the faculty to publish either open access or subscription-based journals developed for a particular team or for a particular project, but to do this in a way that removes control over that content from commercial publishers and puts it back in the hands of scholars. So in Scholars Portal, to support that activity in the schools, we've begun hosting various software applications, such as the Open Journal System, and we're looking at an Open Monograph platform as well. And the goal here is really to support the scholarly publishing activities at the individual libraries in OCO, which in turn we hope will be a support for Canadian scholarship. On the preservation side of things, preservation has always been an important role of academic libraries. They've exercised that role in the past in terms of management and maintenance of the large print collections that they have in their physical buildings. What we're tackling within Scholars Portal now is how we can ensure long-term preservation of those large volumes, those large collections of digital resources that I just described, that we've been collecting in the various repositories. So the first, we started looking at this about 5 years ago, and at that time there was emerging some consensus in the preservation world around developing auditing criteria for digital repositories based on what was called the OAIS reference model, or the Open Archival Information Systems Access Model. And essentially what OAIS does is it describes a separation of functionalities within a digital archive that allow for the structuring, the physical structuring of that archive, but also allow for evaluation of various elements of it that would end up leading to certification. And out of the OIS effort, a new standard, the ISO 16363 standard, often referred to as the Trusted Digital Repository Standard, has emerged. It's an ISO standard just now that essentially takes the OIS model and develops an audit checklist that covers everything from institutional commitment to long-term preservation, including financial evidence of financial commitment to that, to appropriate staffing, to appropriate hardware, to appropriate processes for ingesting and curating material, for appropriate security models, and so forth. So what we've been doing at Scholars Portal on behalf of OCO over the last couple of years is going through the ISO standard and the checklists that are provided, and really putting in place all of that infrastructure and all of that policy framework to ensure that we are conformant to the ISO standard. So we've had an on-site audit, and we're just waiting now for final word on that certification. So Trusted Digital Repository status is not a magic thing. It doesn't. It's not a one-time thing either. It's think of it as a continuous review and a continuous improvement process for institutions that have taken on the responsibility for long-term preservation of digital content. In our case, we have sought TDR status initially in relation to our journal content. Our goal is to further extend that through additional audits and to extend TDR status to our other collections, including electronic books, numeric data, and our geospatial resources. I did this on a Mac, so I'm not sure if I'm being punished here. There we go. Okay. So another brand new area for Scholars Portal and for OCO was our involvement in the International Polar Year Data Assembly Network project. So this opportunity arose. It was an RFI process or RFP process sent out from Indian and Northern Affairs Canada to create a network of institutions across the country who would commit to working together to build a repository for ingesting and then supporting the long-term preservation and access to data collected out of the International Polar Year Project. So a totally new area for us, and one that we were I would say initially probably a little out of our depths on, but I think with the help of the other partners, in particular help of Julie and the Polar Data Catalog folks, I think we've pulled together an effective network where we have taken essentially the OAIS model for digital archives and applied that to create differentiation of function within the network. So as it was said earlier, the role that Scholars Portal and OCO have taken on within the Assembly in partnership with the University of Alberta is to build essentially the archival storage backbone for the IPY data network. So what we did is we acquired from Canary a dedicated light path between the two institutions to allow sensitive data captured as part of the IPY project to be replicated and transferred between the two sites on a secure line, so that there would be no opportunity for anyone to hijack that data. The data is stored in both institutions to support geographic distribution of the content as a way to help ensure long-term preservation and access. So if a disaster were to happen at one facility, an exact copy of the material is available at another. Similarly, if there were some smaller accidents in terms of damaged hardware, the content available at one site is available to heal and refresh the content at the other site. So essentially a data storage network that has archival management properties built into it. And a lot of that is provided by a layer of middleware software, which we also implemented as part of the project called IRODS, or Integrated Rule-Oriented Data System. This really came out of the high performance computing data grid environment, but essentially what it does is it allows administrators to set up rules around the management of data within a distributed data system, so that content can be ingested, various activities performed on it to check for validity, calculate checksum information, and so forth, and handle the disposition of that content over the life cycle of the content across the network. So it's a fascinating activity for us. We've learned an incredible amount of that from that, and I think it's helped position us well to start thinking about additional roles for OCO and for Scholars Portal in terms of research data management. So following the IPY project, our first pilot in the area of data management was really to see if we could identify a tool, a very simple tool that could be used at individual libraries to be offered out to researchers on their campuses as a place to deposit and organize research data created either as part of a research project that has passed, or to be used as a storage space for research data in progress. And the whole goal with Dataverse was really to give a tool that put the control in the hands of the researchers in terms of access controls, in terms of how they wanted to organize the data, and also had a very simple mechanism for capturing metadata at the point of creation of the data, so that information about calibration, for instance, or other important aspects that would have value in long-term preservation could be easily captured at the point of ingest of the data. So while Dataverse itself is not a data preservation tool, we felt that it was a good front end with a very low barrier for individual researchers to be able to get content into the system. And we knew also that many disciplines have large field repositories that perform this function for them now, particularly the science disciplines where they've been used to dealing with big data. The gap we were trying to fill, I think, with the Dataverse tool was really that long tail of research data, the much smaller collections of much smaller data sets that often remain sitting on professors' desks or under their tables in hard drives. So where are we headed? Well, with I mentioned the growth in our storage requirements and our server requirements, and the cost implications of that. That's high availability, high capacity storage, but with a very high cost. To be able to move forward and look at establishing a role in terms of a long-term preservation of research data, we really need to think about another infrastructure framework that would be parallel to the high availability framework that would allow us to really lower the costs of storage to make it feasible to store the large volumes of data that are being collected by research projects. And one of the approaches to that, and it's very common, it's coming out of the commercial world in terms of online backup solutions that you might be familiar with, like Backblaze, is really to move away from high-end, highly redundant hardware systems back to very cheap commodity systems, but many of them, and introduce redundancy not within the system level, but between systems, so that when data is entered into one component or one pod of the system, it's replicated 2 or 3 other times across multiple pods. So this storage, the advantage of this storage framework for us is that it would allow us to grow much more quickly in terms of our storage capacities from terabytes to petabytes at a much cheaper level, but would also introduce a kind of geographic dispersion and replication that would work well for long-term preservation of the data. It also would allow us to offer to researchers through the universities standard storage APIs for depositing data into this environment. So not having to deal with archaic tools like FTP, but really having APIs that the instruments and the data collection systems could write to store the data directly into this cloud. So as we look forward to the future, we're really looking at building tools in these this 3-level model. So building up within OCO to support the needs of the OCO schools and their interest in supporting local research for high capacity distributed storage. On top of that, we're looking at how we can also support the development of data curation services. Dataverse is one example of that, but other important examples would be, for instance, facilitating the use, the assignment of digital object identifiers to data sets that have been deposited by researchers, offering those kinds of services. Adding preservation metadata to content that's been submitted into the system. Looking at format migrations over time as tools for reading that content change. And all of the aspects that fall within the scope of long-term preservation. Built on top of that, we would also be looking at developing tools and services to allow for reuse and dissemination of the data. And that could include things like brokering access to resources. So a request comes in to have access to this data, and a brokering service could go back to the original researcher to secure that right. Things like visualization tools, so that someone can come in and read about, that the data was captured in this way, but I want to take a look at that data before I decide to take it away. So these are the areas I think where libraries could play an important role, and we're seeing growing involvement within the OCO institutions on a one-on-one basis with researchers in all of these activities. And so going forward, what we're trying to think about and develop within the Scholars Portal context are consortial services that could support that activity. So how will this be built? Slowly, incrementally over time. So we may, for instance, start out developing a cloud storage network between 2 individual sites who have large volumes of data that they want to replicate. But over time, that could be built out, and storage services could be distributed across the province, so that data collected in one project could be moved quickly to a local storage center at the point of where it is going to be reused. We would also, in terms of data curation services, we'd be looking at financial models for long-term preservation as well. So there are basically two approaches to acquiring storage to support long-term preservation of digital content. An endowed model where money is paid up front to purchase a certain amount of storage with money left over that can be used then to refresh that storage on into the long term. A subscription service where payment for storage is annual. And the models are different depending on the funding models of the research projects. Data management planning support would be another important tool that we think we could develop collaboratively. And that would be something similar to the DMP tool that's been developed in the States to help researchers create data management plans for their funding agencies, brought up to the Canadian context to support the creation of data management plan tools for our national funding agencies. Data management tools and services like Dataverse, persistent identifiers like through DataCite, data archiving and ingesting, as well as web archiving. An important point I think that's often forgotten is that a lot of the context for a research project is present in the website for that research project. And capturing the data is great, but capturing the website I think is also important. Also getting involved in training and developing documentation around best practices for data management. Data reuse and dissemination, as I mentioned, looking at building data visualization services, perhaps offering virtual servers where researchers could take subsets of data and work with it initially before determining whether that was the appropriate data for their project. Doing enhanced metadata markup for preservation purposes, and also looking at things like data publication. So once a data set is given a DOI and is parked in a data repository that has a long-term lifespan, then citations to that data from articles, as we've seen, can be made. That would also support discovery services around data so that people can find not only data within a particular site, but federated searching of data sets from various repositories. Would support things like citation tracking and the development of other kinds of usage metrics that would help prove the value of reuse of data and feed back then into the kinds of metrics that are important within a university setting to show value within that context. So I'm just going to leave it there. So a lot of that was, as I said, was things that could be built incrementally. They would be built in partnership with our library partners, but in partnership with those libraries and their local research communities, identifying appropriate funding opportunities where possible, and just fitting in the pieces over time that make sense and address immediate needs. But I think that the message I'd like to get across is that the history of libraries over the last 10 years in dealing with digital content, large volumes of digital content through consortial activity has really, I think, has really positioned us well to play an important role in this space. And we look forward, I think, to working with everyone to really sketch out what that role could be and what the services could be that we could create. So. I think that's where the opportunity, when I talked about building it incrementally based on opportunity, I think that's where those opportunities could arise. So for instance, if there were funding opportunities at a national level to tackle some of these elements, OCO could play a role in that national discussion. I think the other kinds of partnerships we definitely need partnerships with campus IT folks within Ontario in particular around issues related to authentication, the adoption of shibboleth, a higher rate of adoption of shibboleth within institutions for authentication control, and also building things like storage services and cloud cloud serving services as well.